The cigarette smoke curled thick through the amber light of the Copa room as Dean Martin stepped up to the microphone, his trademark martini catching the stage lights like liquid silver. It was March 1962, and the Sands Hotel was packed wall-to-wall with high rollers, movie stars, and dangerous men in expensive suits. Dean's voice, smooth as aged whiskey, filled the room as he crooned, "Ain't that a kick in the head?" But tonight, something was different. In the back corner booth, partially shrouded in shadow, sat three men who never applauded, never smiled, never took their eyes off the stage. They weren't there for the entertainment. Earlier that evening, as Dean had been getting ready in his dressing room, applying pomade to his perfectly coiffed hair, there had been a knock, not the usual gentle rap of a stagehand or the excited tapping of a fan. This was deliberate, measured, cold. When Dean opened the door, he found himself face to face with a man he recognized but had hoped never to see again. Vincent, the Chin Torino, stood in the doorway, his dead shark eyes scanning the room before settling on Dean's face. "We need to talk, Dino," he had said, using the name only Dean's closest friends were allowed to use. The casual intimacy of it sent ice through Dean's veins. The conversation that followed would haunt Dean for months to come. Torino had made it clear that certain people in Chicago weren't happy with some of Dean's recent associations. Frank Sinatra's connections to the Kennedy family had put the entire Rat Pack under scrutiny, and that scrutiny was bad for business. Very bad. "You're a smart man, Martin," Torino had said, straightening his tie with fingers that had done unspeakable things. "Smarter than your friend Frank. We're hoping you'll make the right choices." The warning was delivered with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather, but Dean understood perfectly. This wasn't a request. This was a final notice. Now, as Dean performed, he could feel those cold eyes boring into him from across the room. Every note he sang, every joke he delivered, every sip of his martini was being watched, evaluated, judged. The audience laughed and cheered, completely oblivious to the deadly undercurrent running through the room like an electric wire. Dean had built his career on appearing effortless, on making everything look easy and natural, but tonight required every ounce of his considerable acting ability. His hands remained steady, his voice never wavered, his smile never faltered, even as his mind raced through the implications of what he'd been told. Dean Martin wasn't just a singer and actor, he was a survivor. Born Dino Paul Crocetti in Steubenville, Ohio, he had clawed his way up from nothing, transforming himself from a small-town Italian kid into one of the biggest stars in America. His partnership with Jerry Lewis had made them the most successful comedy duo in entertainment history, selling out venues from coast to coast and starring in a string of hit movies that had made them both millionaires. When that partnership ended in 1956, many predicted Dean's career would fizzle out. Instead, he reinvented himself as a solo act, a cool, sophisticated crooner who made drinking and womanizing look like high art. By 1962, Dean had reached the absolute pinnacle of American entertainment. His recording of That's Amore had become a cultural phenomenon. His movies were box office gold. His television variety show was being planned by NBC executives who saw him as the perfect host, charming, funny, and effortlessly cool. But perhaps most importantly, he had become the unofficial leader of the Rat Pack, that legendary group of entertainers who had turned Las Vegas from a desert outpost into the entertainment capital of the world. The Rat Pack wasn't just a group of friends who performed together. They were a cultural force. Frank Sinatra might have been the obvious leader with his explosive temper and connections to both Hollywood royalty and underworld figures, but Dean was the stabilizing influence, the one who could smooth over conflicts with a well-timed joke or a perfectly delivered one-liner. Sammy Davis Jr. brought the raw talent and energy. Peter Lawford provided the Kennedy connection that opened doors to the highest levels of American society. Joey Bishop delivered the sharp wit that kept everyone laughing. But Dean was the one they all looked to when things got serious. And things were getting very serious indeed. The same connections that had made the Rat Pack so powerful were now making them incredibly dangerous to know. Frank's friendship with John F. Kennedy had helped swing the 1960 presidential election, with the Rat Pack performing at rallies and using their influence to bring out voters. But Kennedy's victory had brought unwanted attention to Las Vegas, attention that was very bad for the casino owners who depended on certain informal arrangements to keep their businesses profitable. The men in the back booth represented interests that had been operating in Las Vegas since before there was a Las Vegas to speak of. They had built this desert oasis with money that didn't ask questions and muscle that didn't leave witnesses. They had made fortunes by understanding that what happened in Vegas truly did stay in Vegas, as long as everyone followed the unwritten rules. But now, those rules were being challenged by federal investigators, IRS agents, and Justice Department lawyers who didn't understand the delicate ecosystem that made everything work. Dean finished his set to thunderous applause, but as he took his bows, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The three men in the back booth were no longer there. Their table sat empty, except for 3 barely touched drinks and a single white envelope that hadn't been there before. Dean's eyes locked onto that envelope like a snake focusing on a mouse. He knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever was in that envelope would change everything. The question was whether it would destroy him or simply make him disappear like so many others who had crossed the wrong people in this neon-lit paradise built on secrets and buried in the desert sand. Dean made his way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and handshakes with his usual charm. But his eyes never left that envelope. Each step toward the back booth felt like walking through quicksand. The Copa Room's usual energy, the clinking of glasses, the rustle of evening gowns, the low murmur of high-stakes conversations, all faded into background noise as Dean approached the abandoned table. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive, with his name written in elegant script across the front. No return address, no postmark, just Mr. Martin in handwriting that belonged to someone who had never worked an honest day in their life. Dean's fingers trembled slightly as he picked it up, the paper feeling heavier than it should have. Inside, a single photograph and a brief note written on matching stationery. The photograph stopped Dean's heart. It showed him leaving the Kennedy compound in Hyannisport just 3 weeks earlier, after a private dinner with the president and Jackie. He was laughing at something Bobby Kennedy had said, completely relaxed, completely unguarded. The image had been taken from across the street with a telephoto lens, professional work that captured every detail with crystal clarity. Someone had been watching, waiting, documenting. The note was even more chilling in its simplicity. Dino, some friendships are more expensive than others. Choose wisely. A concerned admirer. That was it. No signature, no explicit threat, no detailed demands. Just a gentle reminder that Dean Martin was living in a fishbowl, and the people watching him had very sharp teeth. Dean pocketed the envelope and walked calmly to the bar, ordering another martini with hands that barely shook. But inside, his mind was racing through scenarios, each one worse than the last. He had seen what happened to people who got caught between the mob and the government. They didn't just disappear, they ceased to have ever existed. Photos were destroyed, records were altered, and anyone who asked too many questions found themselves asking them from the bottom of Lake Mead. The next morning brought confirmation of Dean's worst fears. Frank called at 7 a.m., his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Dino, we need to meet now, not at the usual place, somewhere clean." They met at a small diner 40 miles outside Vegas, a place that served truckers and locals who wouldn't recognize 2 of the most famous faces in America, even if they were sitting at the next table. Frank looked like he hadn't slept. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his tie askew, his eyes darting constantly to the windows and exits. "They got to you too," he said, not asking. "When?" Dean nodded. Frank's shoulders sagged. This is about Jack, about Bobby, about all of it. Frank explained what Dean had already begun to suspect. The Kennedy administration's war on organized crime had made their friendship with the president a liability that certain people could no longer tolerate. "They want us to cut ties," Frank said, lighting his third cigarette in 10 minutes. "Completely. No more White House visits, no more campaign appearances, no more private dinners. They want us to become strangers." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Both men understood what this meant. The end of the most powerful friendship in American entertainment, the dissolution of connections that had taken years to build. But there was more. Frank pulled out his own envelope, identical to Dean's, except for the contents. His photograph showed him in deep conversation with Sam Giancana, the Chicago mob boss who had helped deliver Illinois to Kennedy in 1960. The implication was clear. Frank was being squeezed from both sides, caught between friends who were becoming enemies and enemies who had once been useful allies. Dean made his decision in that moment, sitting in a greasy diner with his best friend while their world crumbled around them. He would choose survival over loyalty, pragmatism over sentiment. It wasn't noble, but it was smart, and Dean Martin had survived this long by being smarter than the room. "What do you want to do, Frank?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "What we have to do," Frank replied, stubbing out his cigarette with more force than necessary. "We disappear from their lives before they disappear us from ours." The aftermath was swift and brutal. Within weeks, the Kennedy White House announced that the president would no longer be accepting social invitations from members of the entertainment industry. The official reason was the need to maintain proper dignity and distance. The real reason was whispered in Washington corridors and Vegas backrooms. The Rat Pack had become too hot to handle. Frank took it the hardest, his friendship with Jack Kennedy having meant more to him than any hit record or successful movie. He became morose, drinking more, sleeping less, snapping at band members and storming off stage mid-performance. The golden boy of the Rat Pack was tarnishing before everyone's eyes, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Dean characteristically adapted. He threw himself into his work with renewed focus, recording albums, making movies, and preparing for his upcoming television show. He cultivated new friendships, more carefully chosen ones that wouldn't attract the wrong kind of attention. He became, if anything, more popular with the public, who saw his apparent ease and confidence as proof that fame hadn't changed him. But those closest to Dean noticed the differences. The spontaneous parties became more structured. The casual Vegas weekends became scheduled events. The man who had once lived by instinct now calculated every move, every association, every public appearance. The free-spirited entertainer who had charmed America with his devil-may-care attitude had learned to care very much indeed about the consequences of his choices. Years later, Dean would reflect on that night in the Copa Room as the moment his innocence died. Not his childhood innocence. That had been gone since his days as Dino Crocetti, working in his father's barbershop and dreaming of bigger things. This was a different kind of innocence, the belief that talent and charm could protect you from the darker currents of American power. He had learned that even kings of entertainment were still just pieces on a board controlled by others, and the smart pieces learned which moves would keep them in the game. The Rat Pack continued to perform together, but the magic was different now. They were still entertaining, still drew crowds, still generated headlines, but the authentic bond that had made them special was strained by knowledge of how quickly it could all disappear. They had learned that friendship was a luxury that men in their position couldn't always afford, and that survival sometimes required sacrificing the very things that made life worth living. Dean Martin had gotten his warning and heeded it. He would go on to achieve even greater success, becoming one of the most beloved entertainers of his generation. But he never forgot the lesson of that March night in 1962. In Las Vegas, the house always wins, and the smartest bet is knowing when to fold your hand and walk away from the table while you still can.